Okay, start learning 3ds Max from scratch. So, this is Autodesk 3ds Max, and when you open it, the interface will look more or less like this. And first obstacle that we have to face is the interface itself. So we need to understand that 3ds Max has a lot of menus up here onto the menu bar. Then it has a main toolbar, that is this one up here, and then you can increase number of toolbars. For example, I have added this one that is about the render engine that I use, that is Corona Render. Then we have these ribbon bars in here, where we have something that was called the graphite modeling tools, and they will be used when we will use a very particular kind of objects that are called editable polys, but we will see in next videos. Then what we have here is we have our command panel that contains 6 tabs. Inside each tab there are several elements, and these tabs are simply, first one is called Create tab, and it contains several families and sub menus of objects that we can create inside our project. Second one is called the Modify tab, and if we select something that we have previously created, we will find here parameters to modify it. Then we have a Hierarchy tab that contains elements, for example, about the pivot or about the center of our object, and IK, that is in order to create a structure for animation and other things. Then we have motions that will contain parameters when we want to make an object moving, so we can assign different controllers to the movement and other elements like this. Then we have the Display tab that contains information about tools that will allow us to hide or freeze or show elements in our project. Then we have Utilities that by default shows you only these few tools, but we can also click More, and Utilities contains a selection of various tools with completely different functions that we are going to use time to time for very specific topics. Then in here we have the possibility to save viewport layouts, and it basically shows that right now we have just one big viewport, that then is this part here, and but if we click this low button down here, or if we press the keyboard combination Alt W, we can instead see another layout, and the layout basically shows us different viewports. There are these rectangles here. Viewports are not only places to see the space in from different angles, but also, especially for the top, the front and the left, are also planes where we are going to add our objects. And what we can do is we can or use 4 viewports and then press Alt W to go back to our layout, or if we want, into our viewport layout tab, we can add different combinations of available viewports. So we can have one big viewport, we can have 3 and we have two small, one big. We can have one big viewport, but this is perspective, so it shows the space in 3 dimensions. This one, for example, was top viewport, and we can have as many presets of saved viewports that can be easily recalled by clicking here. Then we have this long area here, that is the timeline, and this will be useful when we will talk about animation. So we have our time slider, and in this case it shows not time units, but it shows frame units. And into the frame part we can also work with something that is called keyframes. Then down here we have our X, Y, Z input fields, and if we make certain transformations like moving, rotating or scaling objects, we will be able also to type in values directly here. Down here we have our playback controls, so we can go forward, we can rewind, we can play back the animation, and down here when we will speak about animation we have our time configuration menu that allows us to specify how long the animation will be, how fast it will go. Then we have these buttons that are in order to work with keyframes, so we can add the keyframes, make auto keyframes according to how we move objects. And then we have these last 8 buttons that are to navigate inside our interface, more specifically inside our viewport. Even if I will mostly use the mouse in order to navigate into the interface. So instead of using zoom with this tool or orbit, that is this tool down here, I will simply use my middle wheel, and I will press middle wheel and I will move my mouse to make what is called the pan movement, that is this one. I will rotate middle wheel to zoom in or zoom out, or I will hold Alt key on the keyboard and I will press middle button in order to make what is the orbit movement inside my viewport to change the direction where I am looking at my objects. Okay? So, without further ado, let's start creating new stuff inside 3ds Max. First simple things that we are going to create inside our project will be very simple objects. And in 3ds Max, what we have to do when we want to create something is we have to click Create tab, so we have to go onto our command panel and we have to start selecting which kind of objects we want to create. We will start with this first family called geometry, and inside this family we will use first group of objects called standard primitives. In here we have this selection of objects and we can use all of them, and the way that you have to follow to create them is very simple. That is, if we want to make a box, for example, we just click box, and then we have to move our mouse inside our viewport, and we have to start by using left click and drag to start by making the base of our box. When we like more or less the shape that we see, we have to release our left button, and then by moving mouse up and down we can set our wanted height, and with a last left click we will create our first unbelievable box. Then, as you can see, box button is remaining in blue, so what we can do is simply we can keep creating as many other boxes that we want. And until the box button remains blue, we don't need to click over and over on it. We can just repeat the process of left click and drag, release the left button, move up and down, left click, and boom! And you have made as many boxes that you want. In order to stop doing boxes, you can quickly right click with your mouse somewhere in your viewport. You will see that your box button is being turned off, is not more highlighted in blue, and now you are in selection mode. So now, for example, we can get rid of all these boxes by simply left click somewhere into your viewport, holding left button, making this big selection window. And if we just want to delete elements, easiest way to do it is by clicking the delete button from your keyboard. According to how complex other geometries are, you may see that you will have to create this object by making more or less left click and drag operations. So a sphere, for example, is so simple that when you left click and drag, once that you release your left button, boom, the sphere has been created. There is nothing else to do. Cylinder, instead, is more or less like a box. You need to make first step as left click and drag. You set your radius that you more or less are liking. When you release your left button, instead, by moving your mouse up and down, you can set the height of your cylinder. Then we have, for example, the torus. Same thing, left click and drag to set first radius. When we release our left button, we have instead the possibility to choose size of our second radius. And then we can move on. The teapot instead is an object that requires just one left click and drag in order to be created. We will see text plus at the end. So let's jump quickly into the cone that again requires one left click and drag to make the base. Then you release your left button and you set the height. And at the very beginning, it doesn't look like a cone, but it looks like a cylinder, because when you left click, you still have to make third step by moving your mouse up and down in order to set your second radius. To set, if you want to make a precise cone that has a pointy top, or like a chopped cone or a reverse cone. But when you are happy with the result that you see at screen, you left click and you are done even with the cone. Then we have the geosphere. Then again, it needs just one left click and drag. And if you wonder why there are two different kinds of spheres, this is something that we will simply explore later on, because mainly what it changes is the topology, so how these two different geometries are subdivided into smaller polygons. Then we have the tube, that is basically an empty cylinder, and again we have first left click and drag, second step, third step to create it. Then we have the pyramid, left click and drag, set the height, left click, boom, and it is done. Last simple object is the plane, that requires just one left click and drag to make this flat surface. And I will use as a first example, so I will delete now all this stuff. I will show you text plus as a last one, just because this starts by being a slightly more complex object, so that I will use this as explanation for the modify tab. Okay, let's use text plus. So text plus is created by making one left click, not even left click and drag, but what you see is just this flat looking object that shows us a simple word that is text plus. So what we have to do now is learning our second tab in 3ds Max, and this is called the modify tab. So the way it works is very simple, and it is like that. When we create an object and we keep it selected, and then we go to the modify tab, what we find in here are all available parameters that will give us the possibility to change our selected object. So in this particular case, for example, text plus has a lot of options. It has, first of all, the plane, and you can choose the XY, XZ, YZ. So in general, just keep it auto so that it will keep it aligned to the plane which you have created. Then you can instead change what is written inside. So instead of text plus, you can change it like as example. And then you can type whatever. You can type space, cool. I mean, you can write whatever you want. And then, if we scroll down parameters, we can also open a large text window. So if we want to make a more complex and articulate paragraph, we can start by selecting each word, and for each word we can even change the font word by word. We can change, let's say, make it italic, make these also bold and stuff like that, and this will change the way that our word looks like in our project. Then we have several other parameters that are about the paragraph itself, but most important thing, we have final interesting parameter that is a number called extrude. So right now our text is looking flat, and this is going to change in a second, because if we increase the value called extrude, we can, for example, give third dimension to our phenomenal text. Okay? What is interesting is that in this way all other objects can be modified. So if I want to make a box in here, I have to first go into the Create tab and make a box that looks more or less something that I like. Then, with my box selected, I go to the Modify tab and I start changing these parameters. I can change them in two slightly different ways, like if I know the exact value that I want to obtain, I can simply type numbers in here, as well as I can instead left click on the symbol of these two arrows, and I can move my mouse up and down by holding left button pressed. So I can left click here, keep left button pressed, and then moving my mouse up and down to quickly changing that particular parameter. In all objects, there are, beside dimensional parameters, there are also additional parameters, and there are more or less additional parameters according to how complex the geometry is. For example, into the box there are a few more additional parameters that are called length, width, height, segments. And to see what this means, what you have to quickly do is you can simply left click in your viewport where you see default shading, and you can enable the option called Edged Faces. So in this way, basically, you are able to understand how all of your objects are subdivided into smaller polygons. For example, our box has no polygons inside each face, but if we change segments, basically we split these polygons according to how many segments we choose. This will be extremely useful later on during this course when we are going to see more complex operations that we can do with solid objects inside 3ds Max. But this is also useful because if we have objects that are round, let's say a sphere or a cylinder, we can see that they look like they are round and smoothed, while in reality they are subdivided in these smaller rectangles or slightly bigger rectangles. So, if we want to obtain slightly different results by selecting, let's say, the cylinder, we can see that in our Modify tab we have dimensional parameters again, like radius and height. Then we have height segments. So along the height we can count right now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 segments, and this is why here we see the number 5. And we can choose to increase or decrease this parameter. Then we have cap segment, that is basically the top and the bottom face. It is 1, so we can't see any subdivisions, and if we increase it, we will add these kind of subdivisions inside the top and bottom faces. Then we have sides instead. There are these segments all around circular face of our cylinder, and again we can increase this number to make a more precise and rounded cylinder, as well as we can choose on purpose to decrease this number in order to make a prism kind of object. And to enhance the fact that we may want to make a sharp looking object, we can also uncheck the option that is smooth, that will remove the smoothness between connected faces. Same thing can be done to the sphere. So we have radius, we have segments, we have also smooth, if we want or not to have smoothed faces. Then the sphere has hemisphere, that will give us the possibility to quickly chop from lower vertex our sphere, and this is a value that goes from 0 to 1. 1 means everything is chopped, 0 means nothing is chopped. For example, it's easy to understand that if I press 0.5, this will make a perfect half sphere. Last but not least thing that we are going to explore as beginning introduction to 3ds Max is that all round objects have always something called slice. Slice will give us the possibility to choose if we want to make round objects completely round. So if we want to make a 360 degrees rotation in our solid, if we don't want, we can enable the option called slice on, and we can choose from which angle till which angle we want to create that particular object. This is true for cylinders, for cones, for spheres, for tubes, and for torus. So we have always same kind of structure. Dimensional parameters first, segments then, and then slice. So if we want to enable the slice, just click slice on, and then we can choose from where to where we want to create our solid. Okay? Next, we will see how to make transformations. So, if you find this video interesting or useful, leave a like and let me know with a comment, and why not make me questions for other videos or suggestions, and why not subscribe for more videos like this. And as usual, have fun, bye!